Welcome to your Get That Nugget for GCSE English Language. Today we'll be concentrating on giving you a framework to answer Paper 1, Question 2, the language question. This session is to complement your lessons with your teachers and not to replace them in any way. To begin, we're going to have a look at the aims of Question 2. This is the question where we have to analyse the effects of the writer's choice of language. So any words or phrases that the writer may have used to create an effect for the reader. Within our answer, we're going to look at some subject terminology to enhance our response. For the purposes of this video, we're going to be using the extract taken from the monkey's paw, which is available for you to download and work through as we go through the videos. Now, for our question, there are 3 steps that we need to look at to be able to succeed at this question. Our first step is the question focus. This sounds quite simple, and it is. Basically, what we need to make sure we are doing is that we are looking at the exact lines or the section of the text that the exam question is asking us to. And in our case, it's lines 12 to 21. It's really important that you only stick to these lines when you are trying to find evidence for your response. The second part of this step is we need to be really clear about what the question is asking us to focus on. The language questions for each paper start off the same. So they all say, how does the writer use language, but the focus changes. So the purposes of this question, we are looking at how language is used to create suspense for the reader. Now, we are the reader. So we need to make sure that anything we find, we explain how that suspense is created and what effect that has on us as the reader. Now, our step 2, this is where the majority of our work will take place. This is where we need to read and identify anything we can find to link with that question that we are going to be able to use in our response later. For this, I'm going to do this line by line. You are able to do this at the same time if you wish, or if you just wish to watch and go through the steps through my work, that's absolutely fine. So as I said, take it line by line. The monkey's paw fell to the floor and he watched it fearfully. So straight away in the first line, we have something that is creating suspense. So our character is afraid of something because he's watching it fearfully. He's full of fear. If you know your subject terminology, you will know that this is an adverb. So what you need to do is you need to annotate that with your pen, just to make sure that when you're coming down here, you haven't forgotten what's up here. Otherwise, you're going to waste your time. Then he sank trembling into a chair. Okay, we've got another little phrase here. So this is a verb. Now, if someone's trembling, they are obviously afraid of something. We're not quite sure what yet. So we are creating suspense for the reader, or the writer is, because we're not sure what he's afraid of. He's so scared, he's so full of fear that he can't even sit into a chair properly. His whole body is shaking. That's the effect of whatever he's seen has had on him. As the old woman with burning eyes walked to the window and raised the blind. He sat until he was chilled with cold. So again, he sat there, he hasn't moved. It's almost like he's frozen with fear. But again, we are unsure what. As the reader, we are unsure to what he is afraid of. Glancing occasionally at the figure of the old woman peering through the window. The candle, which had burnt below the rim of the china candlestick, was throwing pulsating shadows on the ceiling and walls, until, with a flicker larger than the rest, it died. Okay, so now we've got some visual description. And the idea of this visual description is that actually it goes out. So now they're completely in darkness. And if we link that back to the question, the idea that the suspense is created is because they're sat there in complete darkness, not to mention that there's pulsating shadows on the walls. We'll just do a few more. The old man, privately relieved by the failure of the monkey's paw, crept back to his bed, and a minute or two afterward, the old woman came silently beside him. Neither spoke, but both lay silently, listening to the ticking of the clock. A stair creaked. A squeaky mouse scurried noisily through the wall. Here, we've got quite a lot of auditory language, or sound, if you're happier with senses. But this noise, there's a couple of different noises going on. Again, this creates suspense because it's so silent They can hear things they don't usually hear. They can hear everything, it's so quiet. It's almost a build-up of tension as we go through this passage, which links back to suspense. It's creating suspense for us. We're not quite sure what's going to happen, or if anything is going to happen. So that was a quick run through of what you could possibly find, but that is the technique that you should use. You go through the text, and as you go, I recommend that you do highlight. That is the easiest and clearest way for you to do it. And you highlight any phrases or words that could possibly link to the question. It is really important that you do annotate though, as I said before, otherwise you may forget why you've highlighted something, and that wastes precious time in the exam. Now that we've identified and read through, our final step is we actually need to find our golden three. What I mean by that is you would never in an exam have time to write about all of these things. This is a 10-minute question, so you don't want to be spending more than 10 minutes on this question. It is 8 marks, but there are bigger question and bigger marked questions coming. So 10 minutes is plenty of time. With our golden three, we are basically going to find our 3 ideas that you are comfortable and confident to talk about. With these 3 ideas, we need to make sure that you have written about the effects that link to the question. Because if we don't do that, we're not actually answering the question, and we need to do that in order to get our marks that we deserve. With our golden three, you go back to the text and you pick out 3. What I would recommend you do is you pick one at a time. So for instance, the approach that you should take is you go back to the text, and I already know at the start that I've got a couple of different phrases that link to the character being afraid. So I would say my first paragraph is actually going to be a semantic field of fear. Because we have trembling, we have fearfully, we have the idea that he's chilled with cold. If you remember, a semantic field is when you've got a couple of different phrases or words that link together with the same theme. And that's exactly what we have here. So my first paragraph is going to be about the semantic field of fear. With that, I need to make sure that I'm really clear about what I'm going to be saying about my quotations. It's not enough to put a quote into a paragraph and leave it at that. We're not going to get the marks for that. We need the effects. Now I've already annotated it, so I can take that and use that for what I'm going to write later. And in this case, we need things like the fact that we are unaware of what he's afraid of. We're not very clear about this. The writer also creates suspense because it's happening more than once. The idea of semantic field is it doesn't just mention it once, it's mentioned it a few times. It's really strengthening the idea of just how afraid he is. And then we link that back to creating suspense. We're almost afraid for him. Then what we need to do is we need to make sure that with each of our golden idea, we know what kind of words we want to use. Yes, we've got our quotes already, but there may be in the example that you find in the text, a word that you want to really analyse down and drill down into. So for the purposes of this, I'm going to pick the word trembling. So if I'm picking the word trembling, I need to make sure that I'm really looking at how that word creates an effect for the reader. If you're trembling, you're shaking, you can't control it. And that shows just how afraid he is. But it's important that we link it back to the question. And if we link it back to the question, we know it's about suspense. So we need to mention the idea that all of this is true, but actually what effect does that have on the reader? Well, it creates suspense, again, because he's unaware, or we're unaware of what he's afraid of. Do we know if he knows what he's afraid of yet? But if he can't control it, the suspense is created because we're unsure of what he will do next. And that's the approach to the question. In an exam, if you take these 3 steps and if you practice these 3 steps, you will get quicker. So by the time you get to the exam, this will become much quicker for you. And in the next video, I will show you how to turn these into an answer. I'm going to leave you with a question that I would like you to try. The extract for this question is uploaded for you so you can download it. Have a go at the question, use the 3-step approach that we've just looked at. Your question focus, your read and identify, and then revisiting and picking your golden 3. And if you give it to your teacher, I'm sure they'll be really pleased to mark it for you and you can get some feedback on that.